What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and happy FXR Friday. We are back in the garage, and today's gonna be a good episode for me because I am finally getting to work on my beautiful 1991 FXR Convertible, one of two. You didn't get to see that video. I know I got this bike a couple months ago, and I've not had really the opportunity with kind of obligations, trips, other things going on, life in general, to work on the bike, but now is the day. Now is the time. We are actually going to turn wrenches on this bike. As you can see, I've done a little bit. Kind of cheated you guys. I did mess with it, but this video is still going to be packed with a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, so bear with me. Basically, real quick backstory. I discovered where this bike came from. Thanks to you guys at home, someone emailed me and said that they feel that this bike was at the dealership when they were there or present, and they actually saw this bike getting uncrated of all places in Macon, Georgia, which is my hometown. This bike was actually bought brand new by a female. That's why it's been lowered and everything in between. So it's super cool. Thanks to you guys that I was able to get in contact with Macon Harley Davidson, and they were able to trace the VIN number back to an actual purchase order through them. Very well maintained. It's low miles. Like I said, it's a one of two. If you want to know how I know about the one of two and all that, just go back to the video of me actually picking up this bike. Not to kind of bore you guys with too much information, but in today's episode, what we're going to do is we're going to get this bike back to its stock-ish height, and hopefully get this thing running and riding. Maybe not by the end of this episode, and I'll explain why. There's one kind of thing that's going to be holding me up, but we should be able to get the bike almost 80%, 90%, and then hopefully by the end of next week, I will be riding it. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you'll see hopefully photos or videos of this bike running and riding again. Speaking of Instagram, FXR Tour. We officially have an FXR Tour Instagram page. A lot of you guys have been asking for it. I know a lot of the builders have been just doing kind of like the hashtags and things like that. And with the algorithm and everything else that goes on with Instagram, I know it's kind of hard to keep up with it. So I'm going to drop it right here. Boom, 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 boom. FXR Tour _official. You can find us on Instagram. You can find all the builders, all 10 builders. Either way, just want to throw that little plug in here. Let's turn the camera around. Let's show you what we're doing on this bike and what this episode is going to be all about. The main goal of today's episode is to get this bike sitting the way that it should have sat from the factory. So if you don't know much about the FXR Convertible, this bike from the factory sat with the FXRT, FXRP style front end, you know, the longer fork tubes. This bike also had from the factory 13.5-inch rear shocks, all of which have been removed. Now the bike's sitting on 12-inch shocks. The front end appears to be about 1.5 inches lower. Very similar to the setup that my 87 Sport had. 87 Sport pretty much had the same suspension that this bike had, but someone had gone and lowered it a little bit more. It's got 11-inch rear shocks, and the front end was pretty low. I stole some parts off this thing. As you can see, there is no front end, and that's because the lower legs are sitting right here. So these chrome lower legs are in great shape, and with this bike having some other little chrome goodies on it, I wanted to stick with that kind of chrome on here because that bike's going to be getting a lot of polished billet. To show you what's on this table, like I said, factory 39 mil front end, dual brake, chrome lower legs, which are, man, they're little fingerprints, but they are super clean. Here's your stock dampener rods, some other stock guts, new seal kit, and your fork tubes. These fork tubes, like I said in previous videos, measure out at almost 26 inches, whereas the stock lowrider, FXR lowrider is like a 24.25, something along those lines. And like I said, also 13.5-inch rear shocks is what the bike came with stock. Unfortunately, I got a set of 13s. So these came off of my blue lowrider. They're immaculate. I mean, they're super clean. The bushings aren't all blown out. They're not rusted. Yeah, everything just looks really good on these. So we're going to actually use these for the time being, just see how the bike feels. Plus, if you guys don't know, I'm actually kind of setting this bike up more for my wife than it is for me. So she's going to be riding it more and doesn't need all the height, but just needs it to be a little bit taller. So like I said, I'm actually kind of robbing a few parts off of various bikes. And with this front end, when I took apart this front end, there's a few different ways that you can actually lower a bike. And I was very happy to see that they still had the factory tubes in it. Now, I don't know how they lowered the Peach bike just yet. We'll figure that out once we remove that front end and disassemble it. But to show you what was done on the yellow Sport that I had, Basically what they did is they added a lowering spring kit. So to give you guys an understanding of what that means, the typical stock spring length on a Sport or even like a later model 39 mil Dyna is about this long. The springs that came out of that front end are about this long, okay? So there's a good, 4 inches or so difference. Now you can't just put this spring in there and expect it to operate and to perform correctly, because now you're just gonna have a big kind of a sag. And what happens with the sag is that when you hit a bump or something like that, the front end it will extend, get real clunky and all that kind of stuff. So you still need to fill this 4-inch gap up. Now the way that they did that on this bike, or on a lot of lowering kits, is when they're running the shorter springs, they'll add it to the top out spring. So here's your typical dampener rod, and you have what they call a top out spring. So it does give it a little push if you were to hit a bump and extend the front end. It gives a little bit of push, but it still keeps pressure on it to the point where your front end's not going to have a lot of like kind of slack or slop or whatever you want to call it. So what engineers have figured out you can do is you can add another additional spring to the bottom. Now all your suspension travel you're going to have is now reduced, obviously reduced by almost 2 inches. Combine that with the spring on the top and you're still roughly going to have the same distance of travel. So therefore your front end, or not distance of travel, you're going to still have the same gap within your fork tube. I don't know if any of this really makes sense. It's almost easier to make a diagram, but either way, to kind of make things a little easier, this is one way of lowering it. Another way of lowering it is by getting an actual shorter dampener rod. That's what I was kind of hoping was done to that bike. I was hoping that it still had the factory OEM springs, factory OEM tubes, and it just had like a Sportster style dampener rod, because I do have an extra set of FXR dampener rods. Unfortunately, it did not. However, thanks to my good friend Andy at Howland Cycles, he actually supplied me with a set of a little more like a Progressive spring, but they're not from Progressive. These are actually a genuine Harley spring that he took out of his 2005 Dyna. They're cleaned up, they're great. They're pretty much the exact length I need, minus I think these are about a 1/4 inch or so longer. No big deal, it just gives me a little bit of extra preload. So as far as why this bike won't be running and riding after this video is that if you don't remember from when I purchased the bike, the inside of the fuel tank, somebody had obviously done like a tank sealer or some sort of chemical-ish whatever on the inside. It was flaking and looking like crud. Plus they used red for some reason that made it look like a lot of rust. I have since cleaned and let the tank air dry and all that, and I have another kit from the guys over at FXR Division. I plan on pouring in there. I want to use their Battleship Gray. It's from a company called Caswell. So we're going to coat the inside of the tank with that, reassemble it, and then it's still got like a 24-hour cure check. So hopefully by the end of this video, I'll be able to do that, get that on there. Let's get diving on this front end. Let's get the old fork tubes out. Let's get this new front end built and assembled, and let's get this bike back to stock height-ish, stock-ish. We're in the garage and it's hot, so I have the fan on. Let's get all this together. So like we were explaining earlier, you got your dampener rod, you got your tap out spring, just drops straight in. First you got to put your little cap on the bottom, grab your fork tube, prepare it. I do have some fork oil out here, so we're just going to rub a little bit on this bushing, just so it's not metal on metal. Pre-lubed a couple of the components just so it's a copper-ish bushing. I don't want to wear it out. Alright, screw is started. So once the screw started, you can put your spring in it like we've done before. Now this screw doesn't get a ton of torque. Give it a little, it's got that washer, it's a crush washer. Pretty good right there. Sorry if it's noisy as well. I know it gets kind of annoying banging metal around. Or we got our fork tube inside of our lower leg with our dampener rod. Now we're going to take another bushing. It's going to slide all the way down. We're going to take this little metal washer that's going to sit directly on top of our bushing. Then we're going to take our seal. So we're just going to slide it on. Be very careful not to fold the lip up. Kind of get it started where it's nice and even. Then we're going to take our PVC pipe, which is also my seal slide hammer. But you want to get it to where it's just below, there's a little ridge in there. And anything, no binding. But you want to get to where that little ridge will allow you to take this little C-clip and push it all the way down till it clips. Clip, clip, clip. Get your seal on there nice and flat. Everything still moves. Got your little chrome cap. Same thing, get it somewhat squared up before you just go hammer it on, but you don't want to scratch into your fork tube. There we go. Forks assembled, but not fully assembled. This is a factory progressive spring, not a aftermarket progressive spring. Typically they say the progressive portions you want them to be towards the top. So we're just going to drop it in. It's going to sit right on top of your dampener rod. And as you see, I'm going to have a little bit more preload than I would have had from the factory, which isn't a bad thing, I feel. And it combined with the thicker weight oil, it should have a kind of a, you know, an aftermarket feel to the suspension without necessarily being too harsh or too soft. So we're going to go ahead and fill this up. The book calls for 12 ounces of fluid. Let's kind of bleed it out a few times, put the cap on. Yeah, go from there. All right, there you have it. Both legs built and assembled, fluid in them. Everything's kind of properly torqued. These caps, they don't get torqued too much. You know, you got a little O-ring in there. Same thing with the bottom bolts. Just make sure everything's nice and snug. If you do have any questions, like I said, I'm not trying to make this channel be like a replacement for the owner's manual or repair manual. So make sure that you always refer back to your repair manual if you're unsure of any torque specs. But to kind of explain what the anti-dive system exactly is, at least to the best of my knowledge, is that these bikes were equipped with a air-to-air kind of crossover tube here to allow air into the fork tubes to prevent the dive. So they called it the anti-dive system because of that. On most of these bikes, they will have a sticker under your fender that recommends your suggested fork pressures. Basically, the way that the system works, like I said, air is entered into each fork tube through this little crossover tube. This crossover tube actually feeds air from your handlebars, which has a Schrader valve at the end of your grip right here. So this Schrader valve, you'll put the air in here, it'll flow through the bars, down into the fork tubes. This is also why on these specific buckhorns, they're not the same as the RS buckhorns, because as you see, the cables are just zip tied on versus having the drill and the little plastic clips holding it. Obviously, if it had the drill, these things wouldn't be able to hold air, therefore kind of defeat the purpose. So this is actually like almost like a little air chamber, if you will. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove this headlight, get this out of the way, because there's a bracket here with a little valve kind of canister that sits behind the headlight. We need to get that out of the way, get it disconnected from here, so that we can remove these fork tubes, the fender, the wheel, and all that. And we're going to box them up, save them, because if for unforeseen reason I ever decide to get rid of this bike, I want the next owner, caretaker, whatever you want to call it, to have all the original pieces. So let's get this front end off, and then we'll pick back up with just the trees. Also, I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to clean these up. So I got a little bit of white diamond polish over there. I'm going to give these things a nice little quick shine and see how that looks. All right. it's the next day, and forgive me for being a horrible YouTuber, but last night, as you saw, I got the front end kind of back on the bike, and I ended up doing a little bit more off camera. Let me turn you guys around, show you what's going on here. Well, you can't leave me alone with a bunch of spare parts, basically is what happened here. So I had a bunch of stuff laying around. I was just staring at the bike with the new front end and the rear shocks and everything on there. Yeah, things got crazy. Basically, this is just stuff I had laying around. These bars, actually, these aren't even my bars. Sorry, Justin, I owe you a set of bars now. Not a set of bars, I owe you some money. Money or bars, whatever you want, you let me know. Thrashing high bends and a set of 4.5 inch pullback risers. I'm actually swapping the risers out for something a little different. I just want a little bit more height out of it, and I was able to do all that without cutting and splicing any of the wires. So all the wires are internally ran. The clutch cable's a good factory size. It's gonna work with the extra inch. I'm doing a 5.5 inch risers, by the way. So the extra inch will clean up the clutch cable a little bit more. What else did we do? We took the turn signals fully off the bike. The Corbin seat was from the yellow bike, so I switched that and put that on this bike. The gauges are just temporarily mounted right here on top of the visor. I actually bought the Biltwell clamps that clamp to the risers, so when the new risers show up, I'll be able to clamp them on the bars. I'll be able to move these and adjust them without having to extend the wires as well, because unfortunately there's not enough wire to go all the way up to the top of this, but I should be able to get them closer to the bars and somewhere in this vicinity with the new risers. Also had these little guys from the yellow bike. I do have new brake line coming and cables and grips. I don't like these grips, they're too modern for this bike. That will be the only thing I replace. But aside from that, the slip-on mufflers also were the ones that I had on my blue bike at one time. So they just look really, really clean on here. I'm gonna do something different to the seat. I'm gonna get with Saddlemen, get something a little cleaner. This, like I said, I just put this on there. Oh yeah. Speaking of parts, huge shout out to Robert Cheeks, Dry County Moto. He's a huge parts guy, FX car guy. He's always coming across some stuff. He came across these fish scale. These are actually stainless steel plates. He gave those to Hudson for Hudson's upcoming build. However, they're doing a completely custom tank, dash, all that kind of stuff on that bike. Justin felt bad. He didn't have anything to use them for, but he liked them. I just said, well, if you're not gonna do anything with them, I would love to have them on this bike, and I think they look incredible. It kind of gives it that retro vibe. Plus, it's cool to have a part from a good friend there. So I'm gonna drop his Instagram here. If you got any parts or things that you're looking for, you can always give him a shout. He'll do the legwork, kind of find what you need, and a lot of times he already has it. So, but there you go. There's kind of the phase one of this motorcycle. Like I said, I am putting the bags back on it. I do want a different seat for it, taller risers, brake lines, all that kind of stuff. The tank is coated as well. Just gotta let it cure for probably another 12 hours or so. Then I can put fuel in it, fire the bike up. Other than that, I'm done on this video. I'm done talking. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys are excited to see where this bike keeps going. And I'm excited to ride it. So hopefully the next video, we'll get the new brake lines, the throttle cables, the little bit taller risers, all those little parts on here. We'll kind of tune up what we did here as a kind of a test fit. We'll tune that up, make it better, make it more permanent, and take this thing for a ride. So yeah, until then, we'll see you on the next one, and y'all be safe. Peace.